and this is Malpractice Podcast. In an effort to keep the victims of Uvalde, Texas, Robb Elementary top of mind for all of us, we reached out to several leaders in the medical field to discuss the impact of inaction around regulating gun access on public health. We will continue to reach out to these leaders for the opportunity to discuss this topic and to contribute to the conversation for education and change. This episode will be centered around that intersection. So if this topic is triggering to you, or you will be negatively impacted, your mental health or your emotional health, please be advised that this episode may be something you want to skip.
Recently, I had to actually testify at a murder trial of a patient we had taken care of who was shot in the head at close range, and was very apparent to us that this was going to die by neurologic criteria. So this was a couple years ago, and then recently had to testify at the trial as one of the treating physicians. And as I was walking out of the court, this lady followed me, and I've had this happen one or two times. That you always know it's the parent, and so it was her mom come out to talk to me, and this was several years after the fact, and just the pain obvious in this poor mother's face and her emotions and everything was, it was every bit as raw and real and 100% as when the event happened, 3 years earlier. It was one of those, reminders that for the families, like that, they're always going to live with this, and it's never something it's going to go away or that they're going to, get over.
Today we're speaking with Dr. David A. Spain, who is the David L. Gregg, MD professor and Chief of Trauma and Critical Care Surgery at Stanford University. He is the president of the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma and a counselor of the American Board of Surgery, as well as the director of the Surgical Critical Care Board. Dr. Spain also serves on the advisory board of SAFE, SAFE, which stands for Scrubs Addressing the Firearm Epidemic. Here's a little bit of their mission statement. Through research, education, and support of evidence-backed policy, we can determine how best to arm our patients with facts and information that allow them to make the most informed decisions surrounding firearms.
Fortunately, Sydnee was able to have a conversation with Dr. Spain around gun violence, public health, PTSD, and how impactful it can be to have medical professionals take a public stand on this divisive issue. So we are so excited to bring you this incredibly enlightening conversation they had. So we want to welcome Dr. Spain.
Yeah, hello, my name is Dr. David Spain. I am the Chief of Trauma at Stanford Hospital. My pronouns are he and him.
Could you tell us a little bit about how you got started in your career? What interested you about trauma surgery?
I was one of those people that were lucky. I had one of those aha moments as a medical student where I knew, exactly what I wanted to do. I mean, I can even tell you the day and the time and the exact location where I looked and said, wow, this is, what I want to do for my career. It was sort of the immediacy, the pace, the ability to really do something with sort of a tangible impact, in patients' lives and their outcomes. And, started on that path as a third-year medical student and never really wavered.
That's amazing.
Listening to the chief resident who knew how to take care of patients with all sorts of problems. It was that being able to answer hard questions with incomplete data in a time urgent manner and make a plan and be decisive. That really attracted me. Years later, I did one of these Myers-Briggs personality tests, and it was interesting because it sort of gave my profile and how I like to make decisions and how I think about things. And to me, it just what's called a quiet ENTP. And to me, it just sort of explained like why I like to do what I do. So
you find yourself, I'm sure, making a lot of hard decisions quickly.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that comes naturally to you, or is it something you had to work on?
No, it's one of those things that came naturally to me. I like it.
Sure, makes sense. So when someone comes in with an injury or with something that has to be treated immediately, can you walk us through kind of the process?
Yes, it's a very structured process in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things all of us who work at major trauma centers, are sort of we have some guiding principles, and one of the things that was developed, probably over 40 years ago, was what's called ATLS, Advanced Trauma Life Support. And it's a 2-day course that was developed by the American College of Surgeons Committee on Trauma. It goes through and tells you how to set priorities. What's the first thing you have to deal with? This is where the ABCs came out. So airway, breathing, circulation, and it's a whole sort of structured process that the team goes through. And so when the trauma patient comes into the ER, it seems like a lot of chaos because there's 4 things happening at once, but everyone's sort of being driven by these guiding principles, and everyone knows their role. So
Mm-hmm.
it helps in that. And to me, trauma cares a lot of sort of algorithmic yes/no questions, like, does a patient need an airway? Yes or no. Is a patient breathing okay? Yes or no. Is their circulation normal? Yes or no. And then what do you do about it? And so that always also appealed to me. That sort of, if you keep asking the right yes and no questions, you'll sort of be able to usually figure out what's going on. So,
Right.
so when the trauma patient comes in, there's a very sort of structured, organized process that the team goes through to sort of evaluate them. And the real focus on that in the first 10 or 15 minutes is to identify life-threatening injuries. And there's only sort of a handful of those. And then after that, it's, well, we're looking at for the immediate life-threatening injuries. And then after that, it's what's the potentially life-threatening injuries, or limb-threatening injuries, and then
Right.
it goes all down the algorithm so you do a full assessment of the patient.
That makes sense. And when someone first comes in to the OR and you immediately start doing that type of triage,
Mhm.
how long does it take you to make a decision about?
It depends on the reason, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
the topic today is gun violence, right? And so if somebody comes in with a gunshot wound, like, you may have 5 to 15 minutes to figure out what's happening and what you need to do.
Yeah.
And so again, you have to be, you have to know ahead of time exactly what are your steps, what's your process. Because if you have 5 or 10 minutes to figure out whether or not this patient has life-threatening injuries, there's not a lot of time to think. There's mostly just time to do and react.
Yeah.
And so having that structure in place ahead of time and in your thought process is a big help. And so, like I say, for penetrating trauma, if the patient's unstable, you may have literally minutes to try and decide what your action plan is.
Yeah. And how is treating a gunshot wound different than treating other types of injuries for you?
Well, again, a lot of it's the immediacy, right?
Yeah.
You may not have a lot of time to think or to get data, right? So, somebody comes in, they had a car crash, and they may have serious injuries, but if their vital signs are relatively normal, you have time to get CAT scans and get all the data, right? Somebody comes in with a gunshot wound, and they're unstable, you may have time to only do a quick physical exam, and then you got to go to the OR. The risk of significant, major life-threatening blood loss is a lot higher. Was a lot higher with gunshot wounds than with other mechanisms of injury.
Yeah. Throughout your career, is there any way that you would say, have you noticed anything changing about the type of gunshot wounds that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, I'm fortunate where I'm at currently. Like, our overall incidence of gunshot wounds is pretty low compared to a lot of other places.
Mm-hmm.
I think nationally, there has been some changes. Like, overall, I think there's been a big increase in self-inflicted gunshot wounds.
Mm-hmm.
Suicide rates for firearms has gone way up. It's still the majority of gunshot wounds seen are handgun type injuries, but there has been an increase in sort of high velocity injuries over the years, which are obviously more devastating and more life threatening.
Yeah.
The high velocity ones, frequently, sometimes the projectile, the bullet, can be bigger and heavier, but it's also traveling at a fair amount of speed. So, go back to the
Mm.
equation for kinetic energy. Speed has a big impact. So when that bullet hits the body, right, the amount of energy transferred to the body is much higher.
Right. Could you tell us about maybe the first time or one of the most memorable times you've treated a victim of gun violence? Like, is there anyone that stands out to you or that you remember most?
Yeah, like I said, I'm lucky where I'm at, that it's not a high violence area. But there are a few things like I remember, probably the worst night ever I had was like, a little over 20 years ago. But, in one night, 4 young Black men, were killed by gun violence, murdered by gun violence in one night.
Yeah.
4 times having to walk out and tell families that their, 18 to 22-year-old son, brother was gone. It's just pretty terrible.
Yeah. As you're treating someone who's come in with a gunshot wound, what kind of things, I guess, do they typically say to you, if anything?
Well, again, if they're really like very unstable, there's not even time to have any discussion, right? If they're shot and have life-threatening injuries, you're literally like just grabbing them and running to the OR, and it's hard because it's all very different, right? It depends on the context, and sometimes people are concerned about saying anything, right? If there was illegal activity involved, or a lot of times they don't want to say anything. Sometimes the police are there, the context can be very, very different, and it's it can be really hard sometimes to actually have a real conversation with people with all those distractions and other things intervening.
Do they say anything afterward?
I mean, frequently, if people have opportunity to say things, obviously a lot of them are like expressing their like they don't want to die, they want to live, do everything. Afterwards, everybody's different. Again, same thing, depends on the context. Self-inflicted, not criminal activity involved, not family involved or not. I mean, it's so hard, and there's just so much background and context that sometimes can really be hard to get into like what the details of what really happened and why. So I think in the past we didn't frequently get into the circumstances because it was like for us, like, well, that's not medically relevant.
Right.
The circumstances don't really matter to me. I'm the doctor. I'm here to treat your injuries. And I think one thing we've learned over the last several years is that, okay, fine, that's fine for this, but if we don't understand the circumstances and how it happened and why it happened, there's a good chance this person could be back in a year or two.
Yeah.
None of us want. And so, I'd say this, what the social determinants of health and what are the things that drive recidivism, which is unfortunately not uncommon in gunshot victims. Like that is a medical question. Like, I don't want this person to come back, right? And so, just patching them up and sending them back out to have this happen all over again is really, it's not right in the best interest of the patient, but it's also not in the best interest of our healthcare system and in society in general.
Right. So maybe treatment has gotten a little more holistic, you think, with how you handle things like this?
Oh, certainly for us as trauma surgeons, right? Like you're starting to see that now, and this is not something anybody would have talked about 10 years ago. And if people did try to talk about it, most of us wouldn't have known what they were talking about or cared at the time. But I think over the last couple of years, like we as a profession have started to learn that these things are important to us. Like we've always known about the recidivism. It's always annoyed us, right? And it's always bothered us, but I don't think we've really thought it was our issue to deal with. And I think some of the events over the last couple of years, like, this whole stay in your lane thing, right? Kind of in a lot of ways sort of backfired on the NRA, but I think it sort of energized a lot of surgeons. Like, this is important to us. And I think there are several events over the last couple of years that have sort of gotten the trauma community to realize, like, that this is important to us. We don't want to see these people back. We don't want them hurt in the first place, right? We don't want them to come back. And so I think that this idea that again, this is applying to a lot of other areas too in health, right? But this idea that if we're going to really solve the problem and do what's best for the patient, then we got to look at the whole spectrum, including like, why were they in this situation? What can we do to prevent it in the future?
Yeah. And speaking of these issues kind of galvanizing physicians you sit on the advisory board of SAFE, which stands for Scrubs Addressing the Firearm Epidemic. Can you tell me a little bit about that organization and what made you interested in getting involved with that?
It was interesting. It really did start with one of the students we were working with, and a few other people. And, we've all, for years, right, we've all been frustrated with the gun violence that we see. Like I say, our hospital doesn't have a lot, but some is too much, right? I mean, any is too much.
Yeah.
Say what you want about millennials and Gen X, whatever. They're much more socially conscious than my generation was. And this idea that we have to do this and we have ways to do it. And it's, even to the point where, old timers like me have seen the light. And so, again, it was this idea that we, as a profession, physicians of all sorts, emergency room doctors, surgeons, family doctors, we have an obligation to try and make this better. And two, we have some clout, we have some influence that we can bring to the table in this issue, in that we haven't effectively been doing that, I think. And so you're starting to see some of these efforts come up, and partnerships form, to begin to try and address this.
I read an interview that you did recently where you described gun violence as a public health issue. And I definitely agree with that. But could you tell us more about what you mean?
Again, wasn't something that I would have even thought about or been aware of 5 or 10 years ago. If we, just deal with everyone as a one-off, as a single episode, we're never going to fix the problem. And so this is an epidemic. We're having an epidemic of gun violence, and we need to address it just like we would any other epidemic, right? What are the root causes? How do we prevent it? How do you quarantine? How do you, so all the things we do in COVID prevention, treatment, is the same principles, right? And I think that this idea that if we, address it as a public health issue, it gives a good framework and it provides a way to do it that I think is less threatening for some people, and it makes more sense. I think in the past, it had always been a lot of individual accountability. So and so, it's their fault. They were participating in illegal activity and they got shot. Well, they shouldn't be participating in illegal activities. Well, but we never look at why were they doing that, right? What were all the things that led up to that? So I think, again, if we start to address the whole spectrum of why it happens and what we can do to prevent it, then the options on how to help and intervene sort of become a lot broader.
Yeah. In that same vein, not just the increased gun-related casualties, but how have events like mass shootings, do you think, affected you as a physician and affected the field as a whole? I know you said it kind of galvanized people, but
it's hard because they're so demoralizing, right? And when it keeps happening over and over again, I said, when Sandy Hook happened and nationally we did make some substantive changes, I just was like, what's it going to take? And I will say, like Connecticut, as a state, made some changes at the time that were substantial, but nationally we didn't really. And then Vegas happens, and now Uvalde, and you're just like, what are we going to do? Like, when's enough going to be enough? Which again, most of us would just assume never have another one shooting, let alone a mass shooting. But the solution isn't going to come fast. And I think it's, you get demoralized, but then you have to say, that's not going to help, right? That's not going to solve anything. And you have to just keep chipping away. So I think we try to, in surgery, we're trying to avoid saying gun control.
Yeah.
So we're trying to settle on this language of gun safety. Okay, if you want to own a gun, okay, fine. I don't love that idea, but fine. But how do we make it as safe as possible for you to have that gun at home? And what can we do? And what reasonable things can we agree on? Ronnie Stewart, who's the chair of surgery at University of Texas, San Antonio, who's really been one of the main drivers of this idea. He just, so slow and steady keeps, talking about that idea of we just gotta, slowly try and make it safer for people to own guns. But I think some of these events put some urgency to it.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look now in the United States for teenagers, the most likely cause of death is by firearm. When you say the leading cause of death for teenagers for children in the United States is gun violence, like like really people like, what are we doing about this?
Yeah.
Again, and again, there are sort of rational, safe steps that 70, 80% of gun owners support. Registration, waiting periods, red flag laws, some common sense stuff. I just keep having to remind myself that I, can't get pessimistic, can't give up. Like, because if we resign ourselves in, it's always going to be this way. So we just have to keep, making incremental changes where we can.
Yeah, 100%.
Either keep fighting and keep plugging away, keep trying to make things better, or you quit.
Yeah.
And I'd say, and I just don't think the physicians, the physicians, who deal with these things on a regular basis are ever going to be ready to just say, this is the way it is. This is our baseline, and it's impossible to change it. Like,
yeah,
I hope we don't ever reach that point where we just resign ourselves to saying there's nothing we can do about this.
Mm-hmm.
I hope we never get to the point where we just say there's nothing we can do about it, and this is our baseline, and we just accept this as the new American life. Like, I hope we don't ever do that.
Yeah.
And again, like if you'd have asked me like 10 or 15 years ago, did I think that I would ever be talking about this? Like no, like, I used to say, like, for us, like years ago, like,
mm-hmm.
Trauma care, I used to call it door to door. Like, if you bring them in the back door, the emergency room, I'll get them out the front door of the hospital. That was my lane, right? Just from the ER to discharge, right? And again, I think we slowly, and it's not just about gun violence, right? It's also other, like, we have surgeons and emergency room physicians who are not talking about like other forms of injury prevention. Like, we make cars safer, seat belts, airbags, right? And we've done all these things to try and minimize injury. So I think we've, realized, and then on the back end, we haven't even talked about the back end, right? Which is, again, for a long time, we always thought our job was to patch them up and get them out the door, right? And then my obligation ended, right? But we now know, like, if that's all we do, a lot of these people, whether it's gunshot wounds or other medical problems, right? If we don't help them fully recover, both physically and psychologically, then they're just going to be back in the healthcare system again, either with the same problem or another problem, right? But if we really want to make the whole patient better, we have to pay attention to what happens to them after they leave the hospital. So that whole, spectrum of care, like what happens to them after they leave our door, like, again, 15, 20 years ago, if you'd asked trauma surgeons, do we care about any of that? The answer would have been no for most of us. And now I think, again, there's a lot of people out there really talking about, recovery with a capital R, like, like really, recovery. And we need to do more than just address their physical injuries if we're really going to have patients, truly, recover from injury.
Yeah. Because of what you all have to go through and what you have to see on a daily basis, I think it really promotes, I guess, thought on the topic, because so many people are so far removed from it. We only see it on the news, and so we don't have to think about it as such an immediate issue as you guys do.
Yeah, and I think if you go back, like if you look, like, even after like Sandy Hook, like kind of radio silence from we were all upset and frustrated, but there weren't the avenues, right? There wasn't social media. There wasn't this, way to say something or have it, if you did, to have it reach a wider audience, right? Things are different, right? There is this, a way to speak out and to reach a broader group through social media and stuff with, it has all its issues and concerns with that, but it does provide a different way of people speaking up. And I'm not the most passionate person in the world just across the board, right? My emotional amplitude's not super big, but there are a lot of my colleagues that are, this is like very important to them, to their core, and who have been very, vocal on social media about, in other venues about speaking out about this and trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
I will say the one thing I wanted to, after Sandy Hook, there was one person who's truly a hero. Len Jacobs is his name. He's a trauma surgeon in Connecticut, who had to deal with a lot of the aftermath of that, and is one of the nearby trauma centers. And Len is just he's just an amazing person who has a great life story, and as an immigrant to the United States, and a lot of the American dream aspects to his career and life. And he's almost single-handedly, because of that event, started this whole Stop the Bleed effort, which, to try to start to train people to how to stop bleeding in the field, whether it's, just putting pressure on a wound or applying a tourniquet. And it's really started to take off. And he's like almost, single-handedly responsible for starting that effort. And it's becoming a major effort. And that alone, the fact that we have to actually teach people, we have to teach people how to stop bleeding, and we have to teach children how to do active shooter drills. Some of these things that I think are finally starting to galvanize, different groups and bring them together to, again, start pushing for changes. But Len is one of the, Dr. Jacobs is one of the true sort of heroes, in trying to respond and make a change in how we take care of patients and what we do.
That's amazing. Yeah, stories like that are so encouraging. I think for everyone, but I'm sure for you guys as well.
Yeah, and then there's some other people, like there's a few other people that are pretty, as I said, Ronnie Stewart's been a big voice. Deb Cools, who's a surgeon in Las Vegas, has also been another person that's spent a lot of time on this. And then one of the other people that's really been a strong voice is Amy Goldberg in Philadelphia, who works at Temple. And she did a piece, I think, a couple of years ago. I think it was in the Atlantic, maybe, about her experiences. And it just, it's just, really hard to read. As one of my other, one of my other colleagues and good friends, a trauma surgeon in Memphis, Martin Crow said, he goes, I'm not anti-gun, I'm just anti-bullet holes in people, right? And what I'm against is bullet holes in human beings. And anything we can do to make that less common is a good thing.
Completely. That's amazing. I think the work that you're doing, and it feels kind of strange, I guess, for people, especially people in my generation, to say that it's a brave thing to do, to take a public stand about an issue that people feel so strongly about. But it is, and it's amazing to hear that your thoughts on this.
Well, again, and it's not my nature, and two, a lot of times I just didn't think it was my role. And like I say, at our place, we don't have a high incidence of gun violence at our place. There's other people that are, facing this every single day, at certain trauma centers where it's a daily occurrence or multiple times a day. Right. So that always gave me a little bit of pause, right? Because our trauma center doesn't really made me question, like, should I be the one speaking out about this? Right. But as I said, any is too much. Right.
Right.
And then, as I said, luckily for me, last year I was the president of the American Association for the Surgery of Trauma, which is sort of our lead national organization. As a leader in that organization and a public voice and can I not say something? Right? Is it really that? And it just didn't feel right to me to not say something. And so I kind of felt like I owed it to our profession and our patients to sort of try to have some say.
Yeah. I know you said you don't deal with this as regularly as in other places, but have you guys done drills to prepare for what would happen in the event of a mass shooting locally?
Yes. We have had drills. We actually had a active shooter scare like this week.
Wow.
Turns out somebody was shooting off fireworks. But it was near one of our local hospitals. And so we had about a 30-minute window where wait, what's going on, until we got kind of confirmation. You prepare and you drill and for mass casualty of all sorts, right? And so what do you do if you had to move somebody, people through the system fast and make decisions? So
Right. It seems to me like trauma surgery and public safety, they go so hand in hand, since you're the people, when public safety measures go wrong, you guys are the people who directly deal with it.
We sort of realize we have that voice over the last couple of years, right? Mm-hmm. And now I think we're sort of realizing we have that obligation to speak up. So there's been this sort of cultural shift within physicians and surgeons and certainly trauma surgeons, that more than this just being a good thing to do, or it's really necessary. Like, we are really going to be true advocates for our patients in everything they need, not just, their physical injuries. And then we sort of owe it to them to try and address these issues, either before the injury, at the time of injury, and even afterwards.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love to hear that perspective. I feel like it's very encouraging.
Like I said, there's a lot of people out there that have been doing this, longer, stronger, and better than me. I'm lucky in being the past president of our national organization. I'm in hopefully trying to help those people, right? Because like I say, there are a lot of them out there that are leading the charge and really, like say, doing it much better than me. And so I've been again trying to use what influence I do have to try and like say spotlight some of these people that have really been at this a long time, and not just lately, but for years, and really trying to make a difference for our patients. Like all of us as trauma surgeons, like we love what we do, but it'd be nice if people didn't get shot.
Yeah. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. I think that this is such an important topic, and it's so nice and so interesting to hear your side of it.
We need to spread this message. We need to just keep pounding the drum. Like we've got to make guns safer. And as like I say, I'm not anti-gun. We're just anti bullet holes in human beings. And so anything we can do to decrease that is worth the effort. So thank you for helping us.
Of course. Happy to do anything we can. I mean, after everybody has a different event, a different mass shooting event that I think was maybe their breaking point. And for both Jess, my co-host, and I, who couldn't be here today, and myself, I think Uvalde was, I think for us in a lot of ways was kind of our breaking point.
Yeah.
So.
But again, you hope, for the sake of all of those children, that it's really you hope it's a watershed moment that really does start to make a difference. You hope, right?
Oh, you're gonna make me cry.
I'm not going to pin all my hopes on that because I've been disappointed before, right? But again, you have to start hoping, right? Because otherwise it's totally senseless, right? You have to start hoping that somehow that maybe this will be one of those watershed events, and this might actually start to make a difference. I'm not going to pin all my hopes on it but I'm also not ready to give up all hope on this.
Yeah.
I got to pin all my hopes on it because I've been disappointed in the past, but I'm also again not ready to give up hope and just accept that this is the baseline. I just can't believe that we can live this way.
I never even thought about that as a possibility but it's also hard, it's hard when it happens so often. I think there have been 3 big mass shooting events since Uvalde. And it's hard, it's hard not to feel like it's becoming normal.
Yeah. I just think we have to get mad, and not just mad, but we have to take action. And that's going to be at the polls.
Yeah.
If we don't go out in the polls and demand action from those we put in office, then at some level we're all complicit with it. And so, we all own this.
Agreed. I think get out and vote is the best. That's the best sort of hopeful message. There's a way to change it.
Register and vote.
Yep. If you haven't already, great message to the listeners.
Galvanize, get your friends together, demand changes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. The whole last couple of years has been, really interesting and just challenging. I have 2 adopted children who are Asian. And so the dramatic increase in violence against the Asian American, Pacific Islander community. I have another son who's gay, and just like, all the things that have been going on. And again, this, not speaking out against some of these things and not supporting people is really, it's become, something that's not, it's just not feasible anymore to be quiet, not, and so, in the last couple of years with the pandemic and all this stuff, been, so challenging for people, and it's just unbelievable. And then, like say, these school shootings, and I have a son who's a school teacher. I mean, it's just like really, do I have to be concerned about their safety every day, and I just didn't think that was going to be on my radar, but literally almost every day you're concerned about it and wondering about it. And now, I can't imagine being a parent of a young child right now and having to send them off to school, right? It's just,
Yeah.
oh, but again, we got to get mad. We can't give up hope. We got to get mad, and we got to start, again, got to get out, register, vote.
That's the way to go for sure. Okay, I don't want to take up too much of your time. You have been, honestly, when you responded and said you were down for an interview, I was so excited, and this has been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Glad to try and help.
Thank you, Dr. Spain.
All right, Sydnee, thanks a lot. Take care.
You too. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. If you like what we're doing, don't forget to leave us a review wherever you like to listen.
And if you know somebody who might be a medical professional who would love to talk about the topic or any other topic, and you want to share them with us or refer them to us, feel free to DM us on our Instagram or send us an email at malpracticepodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks for listening, and don't forget,
Malpractice
makes
perfect.
perfect.
Bye.